episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, commented, liked, and even those of you that gave me a thumbs down. I mean, I got 2 thumbs down. I mean, that's most unusual for an episode of the show. I get the occasional one, but 2, that was that. Oh, I can only assume that my murdering of the French language didn't go down particularly well. Or maybe it's my review, I don't know. Anyway, can't please everybody, as they say. And as you know, it's just one man's opinion, and I like to think it's an honest opinion. And yep, I guess there's going to be times when you agree and disagree with me. So, but yep, I'll just carry on regardless, shall we say. Anyway, I thought it was about time we did some American whiskey. I enjoy a drop of bourbon or rye or what have you, and I thought it was long overdue. And partly it was down to the fact that I think it was back in February, the rather lovely Sarah from Indie Brands popped into the shop and said, "We're now distributing Yellow Rose. Would you like a sample?" And I thought, does the Pope you know what? Yeah, give me a sample and let me try it. I had tasted it previously a number of years ago. I forget whether it was World Whisky Awards or for the Whisky Magazine or what have you. And I obviously never let past tastings cloud my judgment whether good or bad. I always like to sort of say, right, okay, it's a clean slate, so to speak, and just taste the juice that's in the bottle. So as I say, that was the basic premise of doing this week's episode of the show, was to have a look at the 2 bottlings that they're distributing. And I thought, well, 2's not going to make much of an episode, so as I probably mentioned a few episodes ago, I had a box rummaging session, old samples from the Whisky Magazine and all that kind of stuff, and so I just collected up a few other ones, and thought, well, yeah, let's make a show of this, So we're looking, like I said, at the Yellow Rose Distilling Company, who have a distillery in Houston in Texas. I believe it's been going since 2010, so 10 years of age. I'm quite surprised that they don't actually release an age statement, but no, that's not a particularly big issue. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because obviously I've got several different bourbons here, so it's just going to be a bit of a snapshot, I suppose. I'm also going to be looking at a couple of bottlings from Four Roses, including the sort of Four Roses small batch, the 45% bottling, which is pretty much one of my go-to bourbons, it has to be said. I wouldn't quite go as far as saying entry level, but a lot of people, when they ask about sort of getting into bourbon and what bourbons they should kind of start off, I like to kind of start people off on the Four Roses. I mean, it's a relatively high rye content. Now, I'm not 100% sure that I've got the exact sort of mash bill specifications right, because there does seem to be a lot of conflicting information, and I obviously don't have any direct dealings with the distillery, but I believe that the Four Roses mash bill is something like 60% corn, 35% rye, which is pretty damn high, and 5% barley, and I must admit it doesn't come, well, it never used to come across as quite such a high rye content. Certainly I've tasted bourbons that have a lower percentage of rye, and the rye can indeed come through a lot stronger. But anyway, like I said, at the sort of the price point it's at, 31 quid, like I said, it's a definite go-to, and I've always been impressed by the quality, so thought, let's have a look at that. I'm also looking at obviously the small batch limited release, which is considerably more money. I mean, a lot more money. This is the 2015 release, and that's 275 quid. And I know the small batch is relatively small batch. I believe I think I read somewhere around about 4 or 5 casks that makes up a batch bottling. So that really is quite small batch. Now, so the question is, is the limited edition, the barrel strength or barrel proof or cask strength, whatever you want to call it, really worth that considerable amount more? Well, we shall indeed see. And then I'm going to be looking at a couple of, well, I say personal favourites, I suppose. The old Grandad. This is the bottled in bond 50% bottling I'll be looking at, but the standard bottling, there's a bit of a story there. Back, oh God knows how long ago it was now, a number of years ago now, when Buffalo Trace, in their infinite wisdom, decided to drop the ABV of the standard Buffalo Trace bottling in the UK from 45 to 40% and rip the guts out of it. Basically, I started looking around for another entry-level bourbon, so I tasted a number of the cheaper bourbons, like Old Grandad, Old Crow, things like that. And I wouldn't say Old Grandad was the best of a bad bunch, but it was the one that kind of I felt quite happy with. It always has, shall we say, a slight tendency towards a bit of roughness, it has to be said, which in essence isn't a huge issue, but the bottled in bond bottling should be considerably better, higher ABV, older, one would imagine. And we'll obviously get around to talking about it in a little while. And the final bottling is from Kentucky Bourbon Distillers. It's called Noah's Mill, and I guess a number of you probably well versed in this particular bottling. Now, when I first started in the whisky industry, decades ago, it was kind of universally thought that, or should we say, it was certainly, I was told, that the Noah's Mill at the time was about 15 years old, and from memory I can remember it being in very, very impressive bourbon. I can tell you now from having tasted it, it probably ain't anywhere near 15-year-old. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bad, we shall see when we get there. And it's, bottled at a good ABV at 57.15, so should be a good one to finish with. Anyway, so I guess we'll just, I've almost kind of introduced the lineup, but we'll have a formal look at the lineup now. Right, okay, so we're going to start with the two yellow rose bottlings. This is the premium American whiskey. So I'm led to believe this is a blend of American whiskies and bourbon. I don't know how much of it is their own product. Could well be all, could be some, could be none. I have absolutely no idea. Given that the distillery has been in production now for 10 years, I would imagine at least some of it has got to be their own spirit. It would be a bit pointless it not being. I mean, I can imagine maybe when they first launched it back in sort of 2012, it may well have been sort of, primarily sourced spirit while they were sort of, getting their own stocks sorted, although as we well know you can bottle bourbon practically whenever you want to, and whiskey, but yeah, anyway, so like I said, this is a blend of American whiskies including bourbon. The second bottle we'll be looking at is the Outlaw Bourbon. Now this is bottled at 40% like the American whiskies, but this is quite interesting. It's 100% corn, and it is pretty young. It's aged for 5 to 7 months, and I do like corn whiskies, it has to be said, but I often find that a lot of them tend to have a sort of a slight bitter caramelly kind of character, which kind of jars, and there's only sort of one or two corn whiskies that I've really gone, yeah, that's the nads, and we'll see whether this one lives up to it or not. Then we're going to look at the two Four Roses bottlings. So this is the Four Roses small batch. Now this sample I think came from around about 2016. Like I said, it's a very high rye content if that is indeed the correct mash bill, and like I said, it's a great starting point, I think, for looking at bourbons. And like I said, the next bottling is the limited edition small batch 2015 release. Now, I know it's a bit old. This is bottled at 54.3. It is still available. I have seen it online, and like I said, it's about 275 quid. So it's a huge price increase from the sort of standard small batch. And obviously, the question is it worth the money? And we shall find out. Then we're going to move on to the old Grandad. So this is the 100 proof bottled in bond, so bottled at 50% ABV. This is a relatively recent sample that I've got my hands on, and the bottling code apparently was 111Z408ES. Again, I believe this is a relatively high rye content bourbon. I think it's 63% corn, 27% rye and 10% barley. So as you know, produced by Jim Beam, has quite an illustrious history, and was a distillery in its own right until it was until it was bought by Beam, who in '87 that closed the distillery. And this is one of the wonderful things about bourbon, is that you have so many different brands and labels with their own mash bills and maturation styles and yeasts and stuff like that, and yet they're all made by, you know, the one company. So all good fun. And like I said, the last bottle we'll be looking at is the Noah's Mill small batch, bottle at 57.15. This is a batch number 1761. Again, another fairly recent pickup. So so yeah, that's the lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of Yellow Rose then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on the American whiskey then, shall we? Quite a lot of corn, heavily roasted, almost burnt caramel, quite nutty, touch of spice. It's slightly oily. There's a touch of rye spice, just a smidge. Now this is 43 quid or thereabouts, and it's a bit simplistic, it has to be said, you know. I mean, you know, it's going up against Four Roses, for example. I mean, that's a cheaper bottling, my kind of gut feeling is, certainly from this nose, that it really doesn't have the complexity to warrant that kind of price tag at all. It is very corn heavy, and it has that slight sort of burnt caramel kind of. No, it's not overly rough. I mean, there's a softness to it. There's obviously the oak, which is giving it a softness, but it is a bit, you know. See what the pal's like. Not really a fan of that finish. It's a bit greasy. It's got some nice rye spice, but it's a bit. It's got an interesting battle between sort of the sweet oak and the sort of burnt caramel kind of going on. The burnt caramel corn. It's a bit astringent. There's again a sort of a bit of a roughness to it, and you know, it doesn't really quite flow. It's like I said, it's got a sort of an aggressive burnt caramel character up front, and it never really lets go of that. I mean, like I said, you've got this sweetness from the oak kind of coming in, trying to counterbalance it, and it's all a bit of a battle, and then it kind of gets a bit greasy and a bit spicy, but a bit bitter as well at the end, and I'm not really loving it, shall we say. You know, it's like I said, it tastes pretty young. I mean, I'd be surprised if the you know, the oldest spirit in that was more than about 4 or maybe even 5 years of age, to be honest with you. It doesn't have that sort of young rose petally Mar character that I often pick up on. Now, that reminds me, there was a comment on last week's episode of the show. I'm kind of diverging off here, so just to kind of bear with me on a sec. About my comment on Mar. Now, Mar, M-A-R-C, is a French spirit, and it's obviously distilled from leftover wine. I mean, most countries make a form of it. In Italy, it's grappa. In Spain, it's aguardiente, and sometimes it's a bit of an industrial product, it's a bit of a byproduct. Sometimes you have, obviously, distilleries that specialise in producing Mar or grappa or whatever, and they take quality wine and all this kind of stuff. But it has a distinctive rose petal character. Sometimes it's a very fresh, sweet rose petal character. Sometimes it's a sort of decaying rose petal, and I've had some Mar de Gewürztram, and I won't say who the producer was. Oh, hello. You haven't been around for a while, have you, pretty cat? It is pretty much like, you know, decaying rose petals. It's really quite intense, and it's basically, it's an alcohol. It's an ester, yeah. So when I do mention that, that's what I'm getting. Anyway, let's move on now, shall we? Okay, so let's move on to the Outlaw Bourbon. Well, I'll just see what the nose is like. Okay, not quite so much of the burnt caramel, it has to be said. Obviously, it's very corny. Not surprised, it's 100% corn. There's peanut butter. There's a bit of astringent spirit notes. There's a little bit of wood. It's getting a bit rougher, it has to be said. You know, is this what your outlaws tend to drink because they can't get a hold of? No, I'm not going to go there. It's, again, now this is £63. You know, and I won't quite say words fail me, but you know, it doesn't have it, even at sort of high 50s. It really hasn't got the complexity to warrant that kind of price tag. I know both of these have won awards at the World Whisky Awards, at the San Francisco Awards, and all this kind of stuff, and I know there's a lot of people that love this stuff, but really at 63 quid? Anyway, let's see what pass on. Sweet, buttery, peanut butter again, very corny, not too much of the burnt caramel, a bit of astringency on the middle, not much of a finish, it has to be said, a little bit of wood spice possibly, which is a tad bitter. Again, there's that sort of roughness to it. I mean, it's not sort of like unduly unpleasantly rough, and I suppose, but the thing is, if you're slumming it, for argument's sake, you know, you're not going to spend 63 quid on that. You know, you're going to buy something like, I don't know, Jim Beam White Label or something like that if you want something fairly rough. You know, yes, I can see you're there. So yeah, I'm not a fan at all. I think it's way overpriced, and yeah, I think we'll move on. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Four Roses small batch. See what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Oh, now that's more like it. And that's more like it. No. Oh, that is beautiful. Now, like I said, for a supposed high rye content, I'm getting a lot of soft corn, honeyed, velvety, soft, smooth, toffee, touch of violets, a little bit of spice there coming through, but that rye has got a lovely sweetness to it. It doesn't quite have the sort of it's not as bitter as some ryes can be. So overall, like I said, it's a very soft, it's a very enticing, it's a beautiful spirit. It's it's one to really get you into bourbon because it has the softness. It's not kind of hitting you with bitter sort of chocolatey rye. It's got a lovely sweetness and a softness, and it's balanced. You know, yes, I think if this was bottled at less than 45, if this was at 40%, I think the sweetness would start to become a bit cloying because it is verging on the sort of clotted, creamy kind of sweetness. But it's still a gorgeous nose. See what it passes like. Now that's a lovely finish. Bit fresher on the palate, not quite so creamy, not quite so rich, not quite so honeyed, but it's got some lovely corners, a touch of toffee. It's a lovely interplay between the sweet and the slightly bitter rye spice on the mid palate. It does get a little darker on the middle, and you get that lovely darker rye spice. Coffee tannins, a little grippy. I mean, that has got a lovely length. Again, the sweetness is sort of coming back on the finish, and so you don't get an overtly bitter sort of astringent finish. It feels like it's got some nice age to it. I'm not getting any spiritiness or that sort of rose petally kind of character. It tastes like it's got some maturity, and it tastes absolutely gorgeous. It's got progression, and it's got everything that I'm afraid the Yellow Rose didn't have, in my personal opinion, and that is why it's a go-to bottling, in my opinion. Right, okay, so let's move on to the limited edition small batch. So, is this worth 275 quid? Right, now it's a slightly different animal. It kind of feels more kind of grown up and serious. I'm certainly getting more of the rye. It's got some really sour fruit, barbecued meat. Again, dark rye spice, almost treacle, almost sherried dried fruit, but not quite sherried, if you see what I mean. There's a little bit of astringency, there's a little bit of corn, but the rye is really sort of noticeable here, and it's really intense, and the rye is really coming through, and I really love this. I think this is a stunning bottling. 275 quid, I'm not really sure. There's an intriguing kind of rough wood tannin kind of element there. I mean, it's really complex. I mean, there's a lot going on here, and that's what you want. But again, I just keep thinking, is this really worth £275? I mean, it's fantastically good. A little bit of marzipan coming out now, sort of like the oak is starting to sort of push past the rye. I mean, stunning, absolutely stunning, it has to be said. Let's see what the pass like. Oh, that's a lovely spicy finish. Kicks off with more oak. I'm getting more vanilla, marzipan, almond, which kind of coats the rye a little bit, but the rye eventually sort of says, you know, well, I'm coming through, and it's got that lovely sort of dark spiciness. There's a little bit of sweet spice as well. There's a lovely kind of almost kind of armagnac-y dried fruit. I mean, it's saying that it feels like it has some age, or relative age as far as bourbons go. I wouldn't say it's sort of like, you know, it's probably around about, I would guess, maybe 8 to 10, could possibly be a little older. It certainly has some sort of mature sort of element to it, so it could possibly be maybe 10, maybe a little bit older. Always a bit tricky to sort of say with bourbons, but all I can say is that's a bloody good palate. But again, I'm sort of thinking, is that really worth £275? I mean, food for thought, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the old Grandad 100 proof. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's got some lovely soft orange tangerine kind of notes. It's a little reserved. It's got some lovely sort of juicy sort of right, okay, so let's move on to the old Grandad 100 proof. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's got some intensity. It's got some lovely kind of orange tangerine notes. Rye, darker rye spice. It's sort of, yeah, I can see that it doesn't quite have the rye intensity of the limited edition Four Roses, but certainly it's got quite a bit of rye character up front. There's a little bit of caramelly corn, burnt caramelly corn in the background. Touch of oak, a bit of ginger, pepper. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me very much of the standard bottling of old Grandad, but with a bit more intensity. And I suppose what this is about, what, 50 quid? Yeah, I think this has got enough complexity and interest to warrant that price tag. It's not the most complex of bourbons I've come across. But it's got some lovely intensity to it, and like I say, I think there's enough complexity on the nose to warrant its price tag. So let's have a look at the palate. Quite chocolatey, dark, and milk chocolate. Kicks off with the corn, a bit edgy, I suppose. The darker rye spice kind of moves in on the mid palate. Some lovely spices. It's a little masked on the finish, whereas the Four Roses, I don't think that really needed water at all. I mean, it's got a lovely intensity, it has to be said. It's a little bit of that rose petally mar on the very end, which kind of does say, I'm a bit young. I mean, it's, again, bottled in bond, what's it, 4 years old, isn't it? And it tastes young. But like I said, it's got some lovely chocolatiness. It's got some lovely sort of spiciness, some lovely rye. Again, I think it's a step above the standard bottling of old Grandad. I am going to put a little drop of water with it just to sort of see what that does. So I don't think it really needs it. It's a little masked, like I said, but I'm just kind of curious to see what water does to it. And the oak kind of steps back a bit. I'm getting more sweet corn, more of that juicy orange and tangerine. It's lessened that sort of chocolatey rye character. It's a little simplistic, or a little simpler, and there is a little burnt caramel character to the corn. So pass like that. well, it definitely shows up its youthfulness, it has to be said, on the finish. Well, that has a little bit of violets as well now. Juicy, a little bit more astringent though as well. I think personally, I think I would drink that neat without water. I don't think water really does it a huge amount of favours. It does kind of, like I said, makes it a little astringent. Does bring forward the oak a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's 50 quid. I mean, what do you get for 50 quid? Well, anyway, yeah, I kind of quite like it. Okay, so let's move on to the Noah's Mill. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's a lovely nose. I mean, that's impressive. Dark, spicy rye, chocolate, dark chocolate, touch of menthol, real intensity. So, I mean, this comes across like a high rye content bourbon. I mean, yeah, excuse me. There's a little bit of corn there in the background, but really the rye is where the focus is at. I mean, it's got a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of oak, a little bit of walnut, pecan, maybe sort of maple syrup. It's really dark, it's spicy, yeah, I mean, 70 quid. I mean, I've not got an issue excuse me, with this whatsoever. It's intense, it's stunning, it's damn good. See what the power's like. Dark, spicy, really quite youthful. I'm getting a lot of that rose petal mar, but it's got intensity to it. There's a touch of orange, there's a touch of menthol, there's some dark chocolate, some spice. I mean, again, it is really quite rye intense. There's some herbal rye, there's some spicy rye, there's a little bit of burnt caramel, a little, you know, not a lot, and I'm not going to get too bent up out of shape about that. It's got a bit of a dry finish, that's the alcohol. Touch of ash, touch of yeah, more bitter chocolate, sort of, you know, cocoa, pure cocoa. I mean, it really is quite mouth puckering, shall we say. I mean, I love the intensity. Like I said, you know, 70 quid, I've got no problem with that whatsoever. I really do love this whiskey. I think this is pretty impressive. So let's see what a little drop of water does. It's still quite dark, but it's a little sweeter. There's a little bit more oak now. Not quite so tannic, although it's still a bit chocolatey. I'm still getting a little bit more citrus now, a little bit more orange. Yeah, there's possibly a little bit more caramel, a little bit more vanilla. I mean, again, and maybe there's a bit more sort of rose petally mar. Maybe the sort of the water is kind of just saying, you know, emphasising the youthfulness. I mean, there's no way on earth this is 15 years old. I can tell you that for a start. But you know, I love that intensity. I mean, it's incredible. See what the power's like now. A little softer, a little less oaky, a little less spicy, more of the youthful spirit note, that Mari character coming through now. Quite herbal on the finish now. I think I would prefer to drink this without any water. I don't think the water does it too many favours. It does kind of emphasise it. Well, it kind of, the oak kind of drops off, and it is kind of left, or the spirit is kind of left a little bit isolated, shall we say. So you get more of the Mari sort of youthful character of the spirit. But yeah, damn, it's still got that lovely rye spiciness. I mean, it's still an impressive whiskey nevertheless. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. The Yellow Rose premium American whiskey, I mean, okay, not my cup of tea, it has to be said. I think it's overpriced, and it just doesn't have the sort of complexity to warrant the price tag. And the same could be said of the Outlaw Bourbon. It's a bit young, it's a bit rough. I mean, maybe they like it a bit rough in Texas. I don't honestly know. I've never actually been to Houston, it's to me, like I said, I think it's overpriced for the level of complexity. Whereas the small batch Four Roses is absolutely spot on, damn good, loads of complexity, great bourbon to start with, and if you've never had a bourbon whiskey before in your life, go for that one because it is absolutely fantastic as far as I'm concerned. The limited edition small batch, it's a bloody good bourbon, it has to be said, but is it really worth £275? Yeah, that I kind of have a little bit of an issue with, it has to be said. I mean, you know, does it have enough fireworks for that money? I don't know. It's I'm kind of on the fence with this one, it has to be said. You know, part of me says it is absolutely stunning, but then part of me says, you know, I want more for £275. You know, maybe I'm a bit greedy like that. Who knows? The old Grandad, yeah, I kind of like that. I can, you know, if I'm roughing it a bit, you know, yeah, it suits me, should we say? And like I said, I think with all of the, well, talking about the standard old Grandad, I think, you know, for an entry level bourbon, yeah, it does the job. It was the best that I could come up with. And without a shadow of a doubt, I think the outstanding bottling of the day has to be the Noah's Meal. I mean, it is stunning. Absolutely stunning. Anyway, I'm pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to say good dramming and good afternoon. Oh, pitch invasion.